name is Kevin. I'll be your tour guide. We have our final passenger, so we're getting underway. To the east, where the moving waters as far as the eye could follow. To the west, a sea of grass as far as wind might reach. Now that is how the greatest Chicago writer, Mr. Nelson Algren, in a little book called Chicago City on the Make, described what our area might have looked like to the first outsiders, the first explorers here back in 1673. Nelson Algren, a National Book Award winner for his novel Man with a Golden Arm, set in Chicago's Wicker Park neighborhood, but also described the early Chicagoans as giants lived here once. It was a kind of town 30 years ago that made big men out of little ones. It was geared for great deeds then. Well, today, we're going to see the legacy of some of the giants of Chicago's architecture. From people like Daniel Burnham, who once said, make no little plans, I have no magic. Stir men's blood. Aim high in your hopes. And indeed, Daniel Burnham aimed high. Back in 1893, Chicago hosted the World's Fair. It was called the Columbia Exposition. And for that fair, architect Burnham was in charge of creating from scratch a working city to house all the exhibits. Known as the White City, it had been inspired by Greek and Roman architecture in a style which came out of Paris called the Beaux-Arts, or City Beautiful movement. So although those World's Fair buildings were simply made out of wood, they were whitewashed with a mixture of alabaster and hemp, so they would shine and look like marble. They had 100,000 incandescent arc lamps illuminating the city, showing off the wonders of electricity. And for the drinking fountains at the fair, well, although we have an entire lake of drinkable freshwater, Lake Michigan right here, they didn't even use that. No, they trucked in spring water for the fair from Big Bend Springs up north of Waukesha, Wisconsin. Now, even the drinking fountains were a big treat in 1893. Lake Michigan, of course, is Chicago's drinking source, but it wasn't filtered very well in the old days. So it was a treat to go to the fair and get a drink of fresh spring water. At home, you turned on the tap coming from the lake. You got a great glass of water. Of course, it came complete with fish and other unnameable things still swimming in it. So that World's Fair City was really a success. It was a glimpse into what the city of the future could actually become for 27.4 million people from around the world. And based on the success of that temporary city for the fair, on July 4th, 1909, Daniel Burnham unveiled the plan of Chicago, the beginning of urban planning here. Looking at Lake Michigan, the Chicago River and surrounding prairie, Burnham would map out on a grid what a great city might be. Now, Burnham would see like the great cities around the globe. Growing up along rivers, the river would be the focal point of the city. And Daniel Bird's words from the plan of 1909. Grand and noble architecture should rise up along the riverbanks, to be followed by grand and noble boulevards as well. Now today those boulevards are Rockford Drive and Michigan Avenue. We'll see those later on. We'll also see today how Chicago would gain title of birthplace to the skyscraper in the late 1800s. Nobody's idea of a plan there, but a big accident, what we still call the Great Conflagration, the turning point in Chicago's history, October 8th. 1871, for that was the date of the Great Chicago Fire. On that day, a fire supposedly started, now don't you know, by Daisy, Mrs. O'Leary's cow, over there on the west side of the O'Leary farm, kicking over a kerosene lantern, don't you know. It started a fire that took out 17,450 buildings in a day and a half. And it was because of that fire. Architects and engineers flocked here to rebuild, having a blank slate upon which to try new building techniques. And you needed something new. After the fire had out, they said, that's it. You can no longer use wood as a building material downtown. And then you come to masonry. But if you have a load-bearing exterior brick wall supporting a building, every time you add a new floor, your base wall must increase 6 inches again. So the higher you go, the base wall takes up all your floor space. And that is why for the 1885 home insurance building by William LeBaron Jenny, he tried something new. A Civil War bridge building engineer, Jenny introduced to Chicago the internal iron and steel grid frame. In other words, a skeleton. And hanging weight on that internal skeleton and reaching 12 stories, his home insurance building paved the way for the steel and glass skyscrapers you know today. These many innovations coming out of Chicago and steel-framed buildings would become known as the Chicago School of Architecture. The father of Chicago School, Louis Sullivan, describing it thusly: a building should be like a Greek column, a tripartite structure, base, shaft, and capital, every inch a proud and soaring thing. Now, the Chicago School went on to influence the birthplace of modernism, the Bauhaus, which was actually an art compound in 1920s Germany, long before it became a 1980s electronica band. And it was the second director of the Bauhaus, father of modernism, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, who came to Chicago in 1938, and as director of the Illinois Institute of Technology here, spread the modern style around the globe. And you know what? A new wave of architecture comes out of Chicago right now from a young woman. Her name is Jeannie Gang, her company Studio Gang, and on our left, the building with the crazy curvy balconies and the shimmering glass is Jeannie Gang's first skyscraper. It's called the Aqua Building. Looks like a wave of water. Now, let's apply Louis Sullivan's form follows function to Genie's building. Well, the function is that every one of those condominiums should have a unique view of Chicago. So the form was determined to do just that. Look how the balconies go in and out at different points. Genie and her assistants took a model of the building, a model of Chicago, and a laser pointer. They looked through the windows, and if they found something cool to look at, like Millennium Park downtown, if you couldn't see it flat on, you walk out on your balcony. If you still can't see it, they move your balcony over anywhere from 2 to 12 feet out, going in and out around the whole building. Form follows function. A little river history. Chicago. The name of the river comes from the Native American Chautauqua, which translates roughly as place of the stinking onions. That's what the Native Americans called it. In 1673, Father Marquette and Louis Joliet arrived here exploring for France, looked at the river, thought too much mud, let's go home. Until the river guide, a 10-year-old Native American boy, showed them a shortcut. At the end of the south branch of the Chicago River, ported your canoe to the southern flowing Des Plaines River, which flows into the Illinois River, and that flows into the Mississippi. This meant Chicago would become the critical link in the waterway system connecting the entire United States. The 1848 Illinois-Michigan Canal makes Chicago a boomtown. By 1890, 1 million people are living and working here. We're the golden funnel. All trade has to come via river to Chicago. We grow to 1 million people, but 1 million people in all the meatpacking plants use the river as a sewer, which pollutes our lake, and 12% of Chicago dies from typhoid and cholera epidemics. So to stop this river from polluting our drinking source, Lake Michigan, 1900 sees the completion of a new canal. Parallel to the first, but the second time around they get smart. They dig the Chicago Ship and Sanitary Canal deeper than the Chicago River off the South Branch, and using gravity as an aid and a few pumps up here in the lake to get the momentum going, they cause the river you're traveling on today to abnormally start flowing backwards away from the lake. We save our drinking water, Lake Michigan, and we send the pollution south to St. Louis, Missouri instead. Our problems were solved. Coming up on the right now, we're going to see a very intriguing building with a mosque-like onion-skin dome, a big golden ball. That is the Hotel Intercontinental. Its somewhat esoteric Eastern design came about because originally it was the Medina Athletic Club, a project of the Medina nobles who were connected to the Sons of the East, the philanthropic Shriners. We could trace the Shriners back to the Freemasons back to the Knights Templar. You have an idea of what's going on. Everyone was into that esoteric Eastern look. And say hello to Big John, the John Hancock Center on our right. Great example of modernism, the fourth tallest building in Chicago today. 1,127 feet, 100 stories. Now you're looking at 46,000 tons of steel. There isn't an ounce of decoration. Every element of that building is holding it up because modernism is a celebration of structure.